Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Abby Newhouse, the Director of Communications for Wingspan Transitions. I've been in the dental industry for over 15 years with roles ranging from hygiene coordinator to practice manager. And I'm excited to be a part of the team at Wingspan Transitions, where our host, Charmin Long Olivares, is the owner broker. And she has over 30 years of dental industry experience, and I'm excited to hear some tips and advice that you have for all of our viewers today. Charmin, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Always happy to share. I started in the industry very young, started high school as an assistant, became a hygienist by 19. By 22, I was coaching and consulting in the industry. That evolved into brokering. So I've been coach consultant 30 years, brokering for 20 years. Brokering is my absolute passion and what I do 95% of the time now. Moving these practices from a seller who they've decided it's time to find that right buyer and get that transaction done very simply and easily for them.
Thank you, Charmin. Today's focus will be on navigating practice transitions. Whether you're considering hiring an associate or the sale of your practice, we will be discussing how to leverage your practice as an investment vehicle. Let's talk a little bit about what sets Wingspan apart.
A lot of things. Number one, I hear more and more from doctors who call me. They're like, thank you, you're so approachable, you actually give me good advice and you help me. So number one though, in the industry, I'm very different because there are no fees, there's no hidden fees. When I do sell a practice for a doctor, the only thing they pay, Wingspan Transitions, is the percentage I charge to do the transaction itself.
Wow.
So there are no listing fees, there are no valuation fees, there's no hidden fees of any kind.
So it sounds like they could just pick up the phone today, give you a call, not knowing whether they want to sell their practice, find an associate, maybe they want to buy a practice. You have a lot of answers to the questions that the people that are with us today are asking. How much is my practice worth, for instance? How do I tell my team, I found a buyer, but how do I make this legal and what do I do next? Would you share with us some common advice that you give when they do pick up the phone and they call you? I know you're an excellent resource for dentists. Then your heart really is there.
Absolutely, Abby. You know, the doctors have worked so hard. They've built these businesses. They deserve to get the most out of them. They deserve for the transaction and the transition to go as smoothly and easily and as close to how they've envisioned as possible. So yes, many doctors call me. They can absolutely pick up the phone and talk to me. There is not a consultation fee. I enjoy helping them figure out their situation and where they are in their career. I tell doctors when they ask me, when should I call you? You know, some do that. Some say, when should I call you? And I'm like, if you want to sell tomorrow or 10 years from now, get a plan together. Get some professional advice. Let's talk it over and see, where are you? Where are you in your career? What are your personal and professional goals? Where is the practice in its progression? And are you optimizing your opportunity in that practice or are you not? So many times doctors have no idea whether it's time to sell or not when they call me. I just talk it over with them and discover different things about their life, different things about their practice, what meets their family needs, what meets their professional needs. And many times, you know, I believe a doctor can't make a decision for themselves unless they kind of know what it's worth. And that's the thing where other brokers will not even tell a doctor what they think it's worth without charging them a fee. And I could spend about 20 minutes on the phone with a doctor and give them a ballpark of what their city, their situation, based on operatories, based on active patients, based on locale, based on many factors. But if they'll share that with me in a conversation in about 20 minutes, I can give them a ballpark number of what to expect. And that's hugely helpful. For example, you know, if they call me and they say, well, I kind of want, because I ask them too, what's your expectation? Before I even try to figure out what it's worth for them. And some doctors are like, okay, I want X amount for my practice. And I talk it over with them and I tell them, oh, wow, okay, you know, I can actually get you this amount. And then from there, that doctor's like blown away. They're like, are you kidding me? Well, now that totally changes things. And maybe I want to sell sooner rather than later. And then some doctors say they want X amount. And I tell them it's only worth this amount. And then we have more conversations because I want to help them. I want to help them get where they want to be. That's what they want. But I'm like, it's going to take some hard work. You know, how much are you willing to put in? How much effort do you have it in you to do it, to drive it up? And I'll talk it over and give them ideas. And oftentimes I will say, you need to do X, Y, Z, and call me back. Go try to do that. Get the practice where you want it. Call me back in 6 months, 12 months, 2 months, 3 months. Whenever you feel like you've made the change, call me back. Let's talk it over again. And we actually just had this happen another time. It's just a good example of it. Last November, I had a dentist call me outside Houston. And actually, she called me the November before, 22. We have to backtrack. So she called me then, and she wanted X amount for her practice. I told her it was worth this. I said, go do these things and call me back. She called me back a year later, and she goes, you're going to be so impressed and so happy. I did everything you told me to do, and the numbers are there. You are now going to be able to value it at what I want. And I said, great, send me the numbers. If that's the truth, then absolutely, you know, I'm going to be so happy and proud. And she thanked me greatly because she said, you're the only person who's ever helped me. You're the only person who gave me sound advice. And so she listed it with me, and now next month we're getting her almost $2 million that she really wanted. So that's, you know, just an example of, I just shoot from the hip and say, you need to do this, this, and this. And this doctor actually went and did that. And that works for some doctors, but not all doctors. Some doctors are like, oh, there's no way I'm going to be able to do X, Y, Z on my own. And when that's the case, then I do tell them, hey, I am a coach consultant. I can help you with that as well. And they can use me to help facilitate that and get to the numbers they want to get to. So that's an option for them too. That's always out there and can be thrown out there for them to benefit. But so doctors now, because I can share with them what it's worth, now they can make a decision for themselves. The other thing I always share with doctors who call and say, is now the time? I explain to them how things have changed basically in the last 4 years, kind of post-COVID. That in the last 4 years, you take a practice and you want to evaluate it, the average single doctor practice that you're going to evaluate, the way we've always done it is you pick up a calculator and you average the previous 2 years' collections. And prior to COVID, for the 30 years prior that I participated in this industry, we were getting 60 to 80% of that value. That was it. 80% was topping out. In the last 4 years, since COVID, now we're getting 85 to 100%. And so that's a huge value game changer for the practices that are causing a lot of doctors to decide, maybe it is time to sell. And what I tell them too is, I don't know how long this is going to last. I don't know if this is the new normal. I don't know if we're going to slip back into what happened the previous 30 years. But for now, that is what's going on. So the other thing, so I like everyone who's considering selling to know that is a fact. The other thing I like for the sellers to understand is that 85% of what we do at Wingspan is private seller to private buyer. And so we can sell to DSOs. I have plenty of those contacts as well. But honestly, our sellers, 85% of them want it to go to a private buyer. About 15% are open to going to a DSO, and that's great. We can get that done if that's what that seller wants. But if the seller wants a private buyer, you know, that's where we're different. We have such a huge bank of buyers, whether it's the DSOs, private equities, or it's the private buyers. And so it's really great to be able to fulfill on that, because we may be the only broker in Texas or the nation that can actually do both really well.
I love when the dentists pick up the phone and call us with questions. One thing I appreciate working with you, Charmin, is the philosophy of simply being a resource for dentists. Charmin, I have seen firsthand the years and passion you have for helping dentists, often walking them through how to get the most out of their practice, whether they're looking to continue to grow, cut back a few days a week, or they're ready to retire and leave their legacy of exceptional care to another dentist. Today, with our focus on practice transitions, what are some pieces of advice you would like to share?
Absolutely. I actually enjoy taking them on this journey because they often also do not have a good attorney, a good, well, the buyer side may not have a good lender. CPAs are important. We have experts that we work with within Wingspan, and that we, either work with them, they're either part of our company or we refer to them a lot. And so it's very easy for them to do these transactions for people. So we're a good base of getting them to the right other help they need as well. Because we may have the buyers, but they're going to need some of these other services as well. And it's very important. So I help them and guide them when they have those kind of needs as well, get to the right people that can really help them. Another thing is, you mentioned earlier, there's a question that they always ask is, when do I tell my team? And I tell all sellers, do not tell the team until your buyer is actually really close to the funding on the closing table. Now, and if that's cash, I still would say, 2 weeks out, once the closing is set, once the funds have all been qualified. Most often, though, these are going through banks and there's a lender involved. And so after the buyer has taken care of everything with the lender, it's been through underwriting, everything's approved, now the lender for the buyer has given a commitment letter with a potential close date. That's usually 10 to 14 days out. Once we have that information from the buyer's lender, then it's safe to tell the team, because the deal's not going to blow up. It's not going to fall through the cracks. Something's not going to go amiss. There's so many factors involved with what goes on the lending side that it can affect some transactions and it can postpone things. And if that lender is going to postpone the close for 60 days, we don't want the team to know that. We don't want their attitude or their environment they're working in to change, or their morale, because they start questioning what's going on, and keep them in some limbo for 2 months before, maybe they meet the buyer. It just causes too much dissension. It's just not worth that risk. You also mentioned earlier about doctors who call me and say, I don't know where to go from here because I have my buyer. I want to sell it. They want to buy it. We've been talking about this for 1 to 6 months or longer. I get in these conversations quite often. And what happens is, honestly, I have never had one of these calls where the seller calls me and says they have a buyer, they don't know what to do next. I always tell them, let's work together. Let me get involved. Let me help you, because there's a lot of things that are going to have to be taken care of. I'm used to how these transactions go. I'm used to how to propel them along. But I also always tell them, I have not yet had anyone as a seller who says, here's my buyer, have it actually work out. Once I get involved and once I evaluate the practice, I always talk to these potential buyers. They're my first go-to. If I don't have to find a buyer, do you know how much time that saves myself and my crew at Wingspan? So I always want to give them a shot. But once I start talking to them about what the practice is truly worth, what it's been, what the valuation is now on it, they've never stepped up and actually fulfilled. Because what's normally happening is they've targeted this doctor because maybe they're in a location, they're somewhere they want to be, they want to come in, they want to get a deal, they want to undermine the value from the seller. And when a professional like me gets involved and says, hey, you're actually going to have to step it up and pay for what it's worth, they seem to go away. And then we go find another buyer. So I wish it weren't true. I wish I could get somebody through that, but that just tends to be what's always going on. Or they can't get funding because they wanted the seller to own or finance it, or who knows what the agenda was, but for some reason it doesn't come through. And then after that conversation is a no, I move on and just find the buyer for them. So that's why I encourage all of them, just let's get the listing agreement done. Let me actually get to work for you. Let me talk to them, and let's see where we're going from here.
Charmin, what are some common mistakes that you see dentists make in the practice transition space, and how can they avoid those?
Well, several things, but there are some biggies. trying to sell the practice themselves. We kind of talked about how they really get undervalued and it can be a complete waste of time for them. Many of them also try to be their own attorney, and that is never a good idea. Never. You really do need an attorney to review these documents and make sure that everything is in your best interest and everything is legally in your favor as possible. Accounts receivable is another thing that I tell them to go focus on. Like from the get-go, you know, when they sign a listing agreement with me, I tell them, whoa, let's talk about the accounts receivable. What kind of condition is it in? I mean, is it sitting there with $300,000 worth of supposed value in accounts receivable that is truly maybe just not written off because, you know, it's been sitting there for 10, 20 years and we've just never gone through and done a process of writing off the accounts we never expect to collect? Maybe it's a simple case of the front desk didn't actually check the little box in the software that says, oh, we received that insurance check. Because you can post it to some accounts in software without checking that little box, and then it actually doesn't remove it from the bulk bottom line. So I see a lot of accounts receivable that really aren't true. And accounts receivable is something that we can either include with the price, the value of the practice, or we can sell it separately. And so many times when it's sold separately, that's going to be an additional amount. Let's say the practice is listed at $1 million, but we're going to sell the accounts receivable separately. That's going to be another, who knows, 50, 100, 150,000, who knows, depending on what's in the accounts receivable that can be sold. So those numbers need to be real. So if they haven't audited in a long time, go through and do an audit, find out what your true credits are, what's truly owed to the practice, because that number could become very important in the deal. So, you know, and that's advice I give all of them that want to sell tomorrow or 10 years from now. Just get that done. But honestly, if they do list it with me, that's one of the first things I try to have them address. So that's ready by the time I find a buyer, and that number is real. The next thing I would tell them is download and pay off as much debt as possible, so that when the time comes, whatever we are going to evaluate the practice for, more of that can actually go to the doctor if they don't own a lot of debt, obviously. And then another big mistake I see is bringing in an associate without professional guidance. And it can be very risky and dangerous to the seller who has sat there for many years developing a practice, and they bring in the wrong associate, or they bring in the wrong associate on the wrong terms. Or many times they bring them in and there's no contract whatsoever between them and the associate. There's just a lot of dangerous mistakes that are made that it can cause damage and irrepair to the practice if things aren't done correctly. If that associate should turn out not to work out, decide to open a practice down the road, should decide to do a lot of things that can devaluate the practice itself and cost the seller way too much money and time and agony and anguish and everything else. So those are probably some of the biggies that I see that I try to get people to avoid.
Thank you, Charmin, for the valuable insights. As we're wrapping up today, here is Charmin's personal cell phone number. We're committed to being a resource for dentists. That's why we're offering free evaluations and free consultations. It costs nothing to send us a text or call us to chat about your dental future. Thank you for joining us today. Now we open the floor to questions.